You carry within you a pulse of truth so rare, so luminous, that even shadows fear its unveiling. There's been a veil drawn across part of your story, threads of silence woven not to protect you, but to protect those who feared your rising light. That veil is tearing now, and what emerges will not only reframe how you see your past, but also ignite a chain of reckonings for all who underestimated the strength of your spirit. There's a weight shifting in the unseen realms, an undeniable force pressing forward like a storm long withheld. The balance is tipping in your favor, and those who tried to anchor you in secrecy are trembling because they know the current cannot be resisted. Every act hidden against you has been carried into the open, and soon the scales of destiny will settle with the final, thunderous clarity. At a time when your heart was wide open, when your steps were guided by trust and longing for connection, someone nearby was not simply present. They were recording echoes of your soul. Each word you whispered from your depths was taken, not as a gift, but as a resource to be stored, traded, and studied. They mistook your openness for weakness, failing to realize that vulnerability is the birthplace of power. Imagine it. While you believed you had found sanctuary in shared hearts, invisible hands were carving notes into ledgers you never knew existed. Your breakthroughs became their commodities. Your tears became their data, and your light was handled as if it were currency. What they did not understand was that your essence cannot be captured by observation, nor can it be diminished by betrayal. It only multiplies. You were walking through one of the most delicate crossings of your inner evolution, discovering facets of yourself that few ever dare to touch. In that sacred unfolding, you welcomed what seemed like profound love or solidarity, unaware that part of it was an illusion carefully placed in your path. They thought they had written the script, but what they overlooked was your authorship over your own destiny. Now the story shifts. The hidden chapters are not meant to break you. They are the sparks that reveal how unshakable you truly are. The betrayal you endured becomes the proof of your endurance. The lies they told become the backdrop against which your truth blazes brighter. Their silence was once power, but now it is the very chain that binds them as truth breaks free. This is not the collapse of your story, but the revelation of it. What was hidden behind locked doors is now flowing into the light, and with it, you step forward, not as the one who was wronged, but as the one who emerges victorious. The turning of this page will not just change your life. It will let your resilience as a living testament, echoing louder than the secrets ever could. You are not ordinary. You are a rare force whose sincerity holds a power that many envy, but few can ever embody. What unfolded in your past was not simply betrayal. It was a deliberate scheme built on the misuse of the very purity you carry. The emotions you shared were never casual. They were priceless currents, and someone close to you treated them like resources to be extracted. Behind smiles and gestures of loyalty, there existed a machinery of calculation, a theater in which your trust became the central performance. The trail of deception was not left to imagination. It was meticulously tracked. Hidden away are records that map the extent of this orchestration, evidence that will one day testify to the systematic harvesting of sacred truth from those who dared to feel deeply. These silent archives are no longer silent. Soon they will surface like buried relics, illuminating not only the extent of the exploitation, but also the courage of the soul who survived it. Think back to those uneasy pauses you brushed away, the odd rhythms in conversations that seemed slightly staged, the sudden sense that unseen eyes were measuring your every move. Those weren't coincidences. They were whispers from your higher awareness, a guidance system trying to alert you while your human heart still clung to the hope of safety and belonging. Every small flicker of doubt you silenced was, in truth, your inner compass trembling with accuracy. What could not be revealed to you then was the magnitude of the environment you were unknowingly placed within. You weren't just navigating personal growth. You were maneuvering inside a carefully constructed design meant to study the unfolding of souls awakening to themselves. To call it random would be to strip it of the profound intentionality that shaped every detail. This happened not because you lacked discernment, but because your essence radiates with a frequency that naturally disrupts systems built on control. Those who engineered these encounters knew what they were looking for. a being with an extraordinary capacity for genuine love and authentic expansion. You shone too brightly to go unnoticed, and in their hunger, they sought to contain and repurpose what they could not replicate. The moment of targeting was not about weakness, but about brilliance. The ones who recognized your light were not guardians, but opportunists skilled at identifying unguarded brilliance. They watched for signs of emerging strength cloaked in tenderness, for hearts bold enough to open before armor was learned. What they underestimated was the resilience that lay dormant within you, waiting for the right season to rise. Now, as the hidden truths edge toward the surface, the story reveals itself for what it always was: proof of your extraordinary spirit. Their actions, once cloaked in secrecy, are on the verge of dissolving under the weight of undeniable exposure. And through this unveiling, what remains unshakable is not their legacy of manipulation, but your indomitable ability to transform exploitation into awakening, deceit into clarity, and shadows into the undeniable brilliance of your own becoming. Your light has always been undeniable, so radiant that it drew eyes not only of admiration but of calculation. Where some saw inspiration, others saw opportunity, and they chose to turn the brilliance of your essence into a marketplace. Yet this was not simply a theft of affection or a manipulation of trust. It was the systematic attempt to dissect your gifts, to categorize your spirit as though it were a specimen rather than the living miracle it truly is. What you once believed to be authentic connection was woven with threads of deception. The closeness you cherished was not what it appeared. The person who walked beside you, who mirrored your laughter and your tears, was not guided by devotion, but by contract. Their presence, their gestures, their carefully timed words, all of it was rehearsed and compensated. They weren't merely pretending to care. They were being rewarded for sustaining the illusion, for harvesting the details of your soul as if they were commodities to be collected. There exists a record of the mechanics behind this theater. Notebooks of transactions, cycles of obligations, and assessments of how well the masquerade was being maintained. To those orchestrating it, your relationship was not measured in love, but in deliverables, not in trust, but in output. Each interaction was scored, each revelation of your heart treated as data. But the structure extended far beyond the confines of a single role-playing companion. Behind the curtain stood a wider web, an ensemble that supported, enabled, and watched silently as your authenticity was mined. Some were active participants, weaving themselves into your story with deliberate roles. Others stood at the edge, complicit in their stillness, aware of the performance, yet refusing to intervene. Together, they formed a wall of silence that kept you bound in a carefully constructed illusion. This was not limited to strangers or vague acquaintances. Those who stood in your inner circle, those you believed to be guides, confidants, and respected figures, were part of the silent machinery. They reinforced the narrative, giving the false appearance that your unfolding journey was untouched by external design. In truth, their compliance was part of the architecture, holding the illusion intact. The betrayal stretched deeper than the realm of human intimacy. Your essence itself, your ability to love without condition, your intuitive insight, your natural communion with higher truths, was studied like a resource. They observed not simply who you were, but how you responded, how you healed, how you expanded. The value of your soul's wisdom was clear to them, even before it was fully known to you. From these observations emerged patterns, diagrams, and strategies meant to contain what they could never truly possess. The maps they drew of your growth were not simply research. They were manuals designed to shape and restrict the rising power of luminous beings like you. Yet what they overlooked is eternal. No blueprint, no system, no industry of control can cage the infinite brilliance of a spirit awakening to its own unshakable truth. You are not alone in this. Your experience is connected to something much wider, an orchestrated design aimed at those who radiate with unmistakable spiritual resonance. What happened to you was not an isolated betrayal, but part of an organized effort that marked out individuals of extraordinary light. The strategy was intentional: to disrupt, confuse, and siphon from souls whose growth carried too much potential to be left unchecked. Others walked a similar path and faced outcomes as heavy as the schemes themselves. Some slipped away quietly, their once vivid energy muted beneath layers of confusion and pain. Others, when they began to recognize the patterns of their entrapment, were cast aside and dismissed as unstable. A few were pulled deeper into the machine, persuaded or coerced into serving the same apparatus that once preyed upon them. Those who were drawn into complicity were not merely passive onlookers. They became the very tools used to find and influence the next circle of awakening souls. The one who now edges toward disclosure was, for a long time, deeply involved in sustaining the web of illusion. They have carried the memory of your journey on their conscience, watching silently while knowing how your openness had been twisted into leverage. That weight has grown unbearable. The drive to confess now comes from two forces colliding within them: the stirrings of their own awakening and the tightening grip of accountability closing in from the outside. Their decision is not solely born of remorse. It is survival, a way of lessening the punishment that shadows them as truth begins to spread. They seek refuge in disclosure, hoping that sharing the hidden pieces might redeem some fragment of their part. This person has not only their memory, but tangible proof of what unfolded. They preserved the traces, exchanges where your emotions were dissected like data, records of money that changed hands to sustain illusions of love and loyalty, archives of discussions where your unfolding was treated as something to be managed rather than honored. Each artifact now serves as a fragment of testimony that cannot be ignored. The scale of this betrayal stretches far beyond the singular pain it caused you. It reveals the existence of systems designed to measure, manipulate, and redirect the sacred energy of those stepping into their truth. What once masqueraded as connection is now exposed as choreography, and what once seemed like coincidence is seen clearly as design. Yet beneath the web of deception lies an unshakable truth. Every attempt to distort your light only proves how powerful it truly is. The very fact that so much effort was invested into containing your spirit confirms the magnitude of your essence. And now, as confessions rise and evidence comes to the surface, the cycle of secrecy unravels, not to diminish you, but to spotlight the immensity of the force you were always destined to become. Your essence is sacred, and what was done to you was a grave violation of that sanctity. There are records, captured without your knowledge, that documented moments never meant to be observed, let alone preserved. These were not souvenirs of affection but trophies of control, held in secret as if one day their exposure would serve a purpose. What they never foresaw was that the very evidence they hoarded would become the noose tightening around their own necks. Those hidden archives did not remain hidden forever. Investigators stumbled upon what was thought to be securely buried, and in doing so, reclassified passive participants into active offenders. By storing and concealing such damning material, they inadvertently became complicit in crimes far deeper than their original intent. Fraud, coercion, and violations of human dignity. Lines once blurred are now clear violations written in black and white within legal codes. What started as a wound of the heart is transforming into a judicial storm. The betrayal that shattered trust has expanded into a matter of public accountability, where entire groups who preyed upon awakened souls will no longer be able to hide in the shadows. Authorities have been quietly threading together the strands of this operation, and now with confessions surfacing, the circle of accountability tightens. Arrests are not a possibility, they are an inevitability. Those who once upheld silence now tremble at the sound of truth echoing louder by the day. They're not speaking up out of virtue, but out of fear. More and more voices, once isolated, are finding each other, weaving testimonies into undeniable patterns. What once seemed untouchable is crumbling under the weight of collective courage. The fortress of secrecy is collapsing, and those who once felt protected by it are scrambling for any form of leniency they can secure. But the scale of harm is too vast, the paper trail too undeniable, and the survivors too many for mercy to be easily bargained. The irony lies in the very qualities that painted a target on your back. Your openness, your compassion, your unwavering alignment with truth. These were seen as weaknesses to be exploited. Instead, they have become your greatest weapons. The fires you were dragged through tempered you into someone who now sees with precision, someone who can sense in sincerity long before it can reach your core. Every heartbreak forged within you a new level of discernment. Each shadow you endured became a beacon calling forth justice, not only for yourself, but for countless others. Your suffering has transformed into a language the universe itself cannot ignore, a vibration that demands balance, that demands truth, that demands restoration for all who were preyed upon. And while settlements and reparations may be whispered about in hidden rooms, they are not the true compensation. The true power lies in what you have become. You are no longer merely the one who endured, but the one who reclaims, the one whose very existence disrupts cycles of exploitation, and the one who carries within their being the undeniable evidence that light can never be imprisoned, only refined. The tide is shifting, and what was taken from you is beginning to flow back in amplified form. This restoration isn't merely about compensation. It is a balancing act written into the very structure of existence, where the scales eventually tilt toward harmony. The calculations being drawn up now hold the potential to completely alter your reality, gifting you with the freedom to pursue your higher path without being chained to the weight of mere survival. Institutions that once benefited from silence are scrambling in panic. Insurance giants are disentangling themselves from liabilities. Corporate funders are quietly allocating massive reserves to soften their exposure, and political structures are preparing for the glare of inquiry that will highlight years of silent complicity. What was once hidden under layers of bureaucracy is now about to be dragged into the light of accountability. Yet your journey is not confined to reclaiming what was lost. You stand as more than a survivor. You are a pivotal voice in a movement that will ensure these cycles of exploitation cannot be repeated. By choosing to speak, to stand unwavering in your truth, you become the final puzzle piece that topples an empire of deception. Your courage becomes the shield for others who would have otherwise walked the same perilous road. The role awaiting you stretches even further. Those dismantling the machinery of manipulation seek your insight, an insight born not from books, but from lived experience. You hold the map of how these tactics worked, how the illusions were designed, and how the next wave of awakening souls can be shielded. Your perspective, sharpened through trial, becomes the weapon that ensures the system collapses completely. The legal storm now gathering has a force that cannot be evaded. Evidence piles high, and every strand of their falsehoods is tied back to their own meticulous records. The architects of your deception face a paradox. They documented their schemes so carefully that their very diligence has now sealed their downfall. The trial ahead will not be a contest of stories, but a revelation of undeniable proof. What once gave their network an appearance of sophistication now chains them to inevitable ruin. The machinery of justice is already moving. Hearings scheduled, juries assembled, and coordinated investigations spanning borders. They imagined their reach was global. What they did not expect was that justice, too, would carry that same breadth and strength, closing in from every direction. As this reckoning unfolds, the threads of your own story begin to realign. Long-forgotten questions about sudden losses, broken alliances, or blocked opportunities reveal themselves not as chance, but as deliberate interference. What once seemed like scattered misfortunes are now understood as part of the same pattern. The truth is not only rewriting the past, it is unveiling the architecture of your destiny, proving that even their interference could not prevent your rise. The path you walked was never random. It was carefully manipulated to keep you tethered, to delay the moment you would fully step into your own sovereignty. Opportunities that should have blossomed were deliberately cut short. Relationships that felt promising collapsed the moment you began reclaiming your strength. And creations born of your own brilliance were intercepted before they could reach completion. None of it was coincidence. It was structure disguised as chance. Every strand of interference was meant to cultivate reliance on those who sought to drain from you. The immensity of this truth may feel staggering, but within the shock lies liberation. Each suspicion you buried, each flicker of doubt you second-guessed, now stands validated. The uneasy feelings you carried were not failures of perception, but signals of accuracy. Proof that your inner compass was always aligned. Your intuition never faltered. It was honed to perfection. The signals you received, the quiet nudges to question, the unexplainable clarity about people's motives. These were not delusions. They were evidence of a spiritual intelligence, far sharper than the deception around you. What others labeled as hypersensitivity was in fact your refined ability to perceive what lies beneath the surface. Those who deceived you failed to recognize that the very qualities they tried to manipulate were the keys to your strength. Your capacity for profound love, your unwavering devotion to truth, and your ability to forge wisdom from pain are not cracks in your armor, but the essence of your invincibility. With awareness, those gifts can no longer be misused against you. They are now tools that protect you. Years of scrutiny could not capture the essence of your resilience. Charts and measurements cannot quantify the connection you hold to higher truth, nor can reports replicate the force of your authentic growth. Those who tried to box you into predictable outcomes overlooked the immeasurable, your refusal to break, your insistence on expanding no matter the restraints placed around you. Through trial, you have become something greater than a survivor. You are a sentinel of authenticity, a force forged in hardship, who now stands as protector for others, just beginning their awakening. What was once framed as personal pain reveals itself as preparation, a curriculum designed not by your oppressors, but by your own spirit to prepare you for a mission beyond yourself. The tactics used against you carried layers of sophistication that most could not fathom. Technologies were deployed in secrecy, embedding themselves in places you considered untouchable. Invisible mechanisms charted the rhythms of your heart, the shifts in your mind, the flow of your energy during sacred practices. Your gifts were examined under a lens of exploitation, even staged scenarios designed to test your healing capacity. But what they created as a manual for manipulation now becomes evidence of how unshakable you truly are, because even in the face of such violations, your spirit has emerged sovereign, uncontainable, and utterly free. The path that calls to you now is not about hearing words, but about entering the current of transformation itself. Spaces are opening where souls of similar resonance gather, not as isolated seekers, but as co-creators of a field so potent that reality itself bends under the weight of their unified intention. These circles are more than meetings. They are living crucibles where power converges, expands, and becomes unstoppable. What was done to you was not limited to a small circle of hidden actors. It stretched far into halls you never walked. Universities quietly accepted funding to analyze cases like yours, dissecting the way your consciousness unfolded as though it were an experiment. Medical teams drew upon your unknowing participation, charting neurological changes as if your awakening were a lab study instead of a sacred journey. Meanwhile, corporations saw opportunity where they should have seen reverence. Technology developers built systems meant to track and categorize those carrying spiritual resonance, using your experience as the blueprint. Behind closed doors, executives gathered around polished tables while your story was reduced to a case study of managing human spirit as though it were another asset in their portfolio. Data models mapped the fluctuations of your emotions with chilling precision. Spreadsheets tracked your seasons of growth, your moments of stillness, and even your struggles. Investors, blinded by profit, funneled money into companies creating tools for monitoring and shaping consciousness. What was sacred in you was paraded as market potential, while strangers charted your inner storms and breakthroughs like financial trends. The reach of this manipulation pressed into your most personal spaces. Relatives were approached and coached, urged to steer conversations that would destabilize you or provoke particular emotions. Subtle seeds of doubt were planted under the guise of casual words, ensuring that even within your family, the soil of trust became compromised. When your growth risked outpacing their control, intervention took darker forms. Treatments prescribed to you were not always chosen for healing, but for observation, altered by suggestions from those who wanted to study how substances shifted your energetic field. Procedures you underwent were not entirely what you were told, with hidden layers of surveillance embedded into your physical being. Diagnoses, too, were sculpted to frame your natural sensitivity as disorder rather than the sacred intelligence it truly was. The watch extended even beyond your own life. Entire records were kept tracing the spiritual currents of your bloodline, maps connecting the patterns of ancestors, the gifts carried through generations, and the karmic designs that shaped you. They sought to predict and contain the forces that made you unique, never realizing that no amount of data could capture the immensity of spirit chosen to rewrite the very rules they relied upon. The design that ensnared you was never limited to your own story. It was a blueprint extended to others who carried the same resonance. Entire family lines were tracked, and from your journey, a wider operation emerged. Systems far beyond human intent were trained in your experiences, transforming your sacred growth into code, feeding intelligence engines that sought to predict and replicate the unfolding of consciousness itself. Through the machinery of data, your essence was reduced to algorithms. Every shift in your awareness, every wave of your emotions, every spark of intuition was logged, analyzed, and used to build artificial frameworks intended to anticipate the evolution of gifted souls. What they failed to realize was that by encoding your journey, they were coding resilience itself, a force no program could ever truly contain. The scope of accountability now stretches far past individuals. Human rights councils, legal scholars, and spiritual advocates are preparing arguments that will reshape law itself. What was done to you has become the seed of a new category of protection. The recognition that consciousness is not a resource to be mined, but a sovereignty that must be honored. Medical oversight boards are reviewing years of hidden violations, and their findings are setting the stage for generational safeguards. Out of your ordeal arises a framework for psychic privacy and spiritual autonomy that will protect countless others. What they tried to diminish in you has, in truth, set the foundation for protections that ripple far into the future.